Welcome to Market Dive. Today we're diving deep into The Geometry of Wealth by Brian Portnoy. This book really stood out to me because it explores the emotions behind our money choices. You know, the stuff most financial advice just skips over.
Yeah, that's huge because let's face it, we're not always rational, especially with money.
So true. And that's what I'm excited to unpack today. How Portnoy links those money decisions to our values and how we find that funded contentment he talks about.
Sounds like a plan. Let's dive in.
Okay, so chapter 1, Alone Together, starts off with this really interesting observation. We use money every day, right? It's essential. But we hardly ever talk about it openly. It's like this big taboo. Have you ever felt weird bringing up money stuff, even with family?
Oh, totally. And Portnoy argues that this silence can actually lead us to make bad financial decisions. He uses this phrase, money life, to describe everything, earning, spending, saving, investing, and how they're all linked. Think about it. If you have bad spending habits, it's going to be way harder to save for the future.
It's all connected. And it can be super stressful. The book mentions this crazy statistic. 73% of Americans say money stresses them out more than death.
Wow. Yeah, that says a lot about the pressures of managing money today. Portnoy points out that, we're increasingly responsible for things like retirement savings, which is something a lot of people just aren't prepared for.
It's a heavy load, for sure. And on top of all that, Portnoy highlights how our own brains can sabotage us. Things like the fear of losing money can push us towards bad choices, even when we know better logically.
Exactly. He brings up the 2008 financial crisis as an example. So many investors, panicked and sold their stocks at a loss because they were scared, but then they missed out on the gains when the market bounced back. It's a perfect example of how our emotions can totally override logic.
Oof, that's a tough one. Which leads us to the book's main point. To make good money decisions, we got to understand both the numbers and the emotions at play.
Couldn't agree more. We need both financial literacy and emotional intelligence to navigate this whole thing.
Now, Chapter 2, Adaptive Simplicity, gets into how our brains make decisions. Portnoy says we basically think on two levels, fast and intuitive, and then slower and more logical.
It's like having two speeds. Fast mode is all about impulse. Think buying something you don't really need. Slower mode is more deliberate, like planning your monthly budget.
Okay, I think my brain is permanently stuck in fast mode.
Yeah.
But when it comes to money, that slower, more deliberate thinking is so important, right?
Absolutely. And Portnoy has this great idea called rolling with the punches. It's about accepting that uncertainty is just a part of life and focusing on what we can control.
That makes sense. And this is where simplifying things comes in handy, like automating your savings or creating a simple budget frees up so much mental energy for the big decisions.
Right on. And that ties in nicely with Chapter 3, The Places You Might Go, where Portnoy shifts gears and talks about the idea of purpose. Money isn't just about the numbers, it's about what truly makes us happy.
He actually brings up research showing that more money doesn't always mean more happiness. It's not just about getting rich, it's deeper than that.
Right. Portnoy introduces this circle of purpose idea. Basically, our values, the things that make us happy, they change as we change. What matters to you in your 20s might be totally different in your 50s or 60s.
That makes total sense. It makes you think what brings you joy, what makes you feel less stressed, what gives your life meaning. Are you using your money in a way that supports those things?
Exactly. It's about purposeful spending, using your money to back up your values, not just buying random stuff.
Okay, so how do we actually figure out what truly matters? That seems pretty tough. That's what Chapter 4, What Matters, is all about, right?
Yeah, it can be tough to pinpoint. Portnoy recognizes that. He says it's hard because, we're constantly bombarded with messages saying that success equals wealth, but those aren't always our values. We got to tune that out and figure out what truly matters to us.
And it's so easy to lose sight of that in our crazy busy world. It's like trying to find a needle in a haystack. How do we actually cut through all the noise and figure out what's truly important to us?
Well, Portnoy gives us a framework for doing just that. He suggests dividing our spending into 3 buckets: needs, wants, and aspirations. This helps make sure our money is actually going towards things that line up with our values. For example, if you value spending time with family, are you putting that above, say, buying a fancy new car?
It's about making choices that actually reflect what you believe in. And Portnoy says this leads to some pretty great emotional benefits, too. Things like feeling more content, confident, and even having stronger relationships.
Exactly. It's about building a life that's rich in every way, not just financially. And it kind of challenges the way we usually measure wealth, which is often just based on numbers.
That's a really good point. We tend to get hung up on those metrics, net worth, income, all that. But do those numbers really tell the whole story about how well we're doing?
That's exactly what Portnoy addresses in Chapter 5, Beyond the Numbers. He says those traditional ways of measuring wealth just don't give you the full picture.
Yeah, those numbers might show you're financially healthy, but they don't tell you how you feel about your money situation. It's not just about how much you have, but how that money affects your life, your happiness, your sense of security.
All right. It's like it might show a certain number, but that doesn't mean you're actually feeling good about your finances, you
Yeah.
know? He introduces this idea of qualitative wealth, which is basically all the good stuff that comes along with your money choices, like peace of mind and that kind of thing. It's about how money makes your life better, not just bigger.
I like that. It's not just how much you have, but what that money allows you to do and how it makes you feel. Can you give us like some concrete examples of what this qualitative wealth looks like in real life?
Sure. One example is like just knowing you've got a safety net. Even if it's not a huge amount of money, having an emergency fund can really take the edge off, you know? It frees up your mind to focus on other stuff because you're not constantly worried about what if something goes wrong.
Yeah, it's about that feeling of security, knowing you're covered if something unexpected happens.
Exactly. And another example is what Portnoy calls purpose-driven financial planning. It's basically making sure your financial goals are lined up with what's important to you. So like if family is your top priority, maybe you prioritize saving for a bigger house or your kids' education instead of buying a fancy car.
It's about making choices that match your values, not just keeping up with the Joneses or whatever. Speaking of choices, Chapter 6, yes, not really, it depends, gets into how we actually make those sometimes tough financial decisions.
Yeah, and Portnoy gets real about this. He says there's almost never a one-size-fits-all answer when it comes to money. The right choice usually depends on your own situation, like your age, whether you have a family, how much risk you're comfortable with, what your goals are, all that stuff.
It's like when people ask for financial advice, the honest answer is often, well, it depends.
Totally. Life's messy, our finances are messy, and there's rarely a simple answer that works for everyone. Portnoy breaks down why making money decisions can feel so overwhelming, and one reason is just the sheer number of choices we have today. Career paths, investment options, retirement plans, it's like decision overload.
And then you add in the uncertainty of it all. We can't predict the future, so making big financial decisions can feel like a huge gamble, especially when so much is on the line.
For sure. Whether it's investing in a crazy market or deciding to switch careers, there's always going to be some risk involved. And then there's the whole balancing act of saving for the future versus, actually enjoying your life now.
Yeah, it's that constant push and pull, trying to find that balance between saving and living. So how do we navigate all this? Does Portnoy offer any, practical advice?
He does. He calls it adaptive decision making. And it's based on three main ideas: figuring out your priorities, accepting uncertainty, and simplifying as much as you can.
Okay, break those down for me. What does he mean by figuring out your priorities?
It's all about getting clear on what truly matters most, especially when you're making a specific decision. What are your core values? And what are those things that maybe seem important but aren't really crucial in the big picture?
So it's about cutting through all the noise, the societal pressures, the expectations, and focusing on what truly lines up with what you want. And what about accepting uncertainty? How do we get comfortable with that?
That's about recognizing that, hey, you can't control everything. Unexpected stuff happens, and that's okay. Instead of trying to have all the answers or predict what's going to happen, the goal is to make the best decision you can with what you know right now.
It's about being okay with good enough and being flexible when things change. And what was that third principle? Simplifying as much as you can.
Right. That one's all about streamlining your choices, focusing on the things that matter most, and even automating things to free up mental space for the bigger, more important decisions.
Don't sweat the small stuff, right? Make things easy for yourself so you can focus on what really matters. Now, earlier you mentioned that context is super important when making money decisions. What did you mean by that?
Oh, that's crucial. Portnoy stresses that there's no universal right answer for everything. The best choice often hinges on your individual situation, like, your age, if you have kids, what your financial goals are, your risk tolerance, that kind of stuff.
So what makes sense for a single person in their 20s might be totally different for someone who's, say, got a family and is getting close to retirement.
Exactly. And context also includes things like the current economy, interest rates, inflation, even technology. All those things can affect your choices. The important thing is to be aware of them and adapt as needed.
It's about being flexible and recognizing that things are always changing, so you got to roll with it.
Yeah.
So Given all this complexity and how important context is, what are some things Portnoy suggests for making better financial decisions?
He has a bunch of good tips. One is to break down those big, overwhelming decisions into smaller, more manageable chunks. Like, instead of trying to plan your whole retirement at once, maybe just start by figuring out your monthly expenses or opening a savings account. Small steps feel less scary and help you build momentum.
It's about making progress, even if it's little by little, instead of getting stuck in overthinking everything. What else does he recommend?
He also suggests getting input from other people. Talk to advisors you trust, mentors, even friends and family, just to get different perspectives and maybe challenge your own assumptions. Sometimes an outside view can help you see things you might be missing.
Two heads are better than one,
Right.
especially for big decisions that have a lot of impact. Any other tips he gives?
Another good one is to focus on probabilities instead of trying to be absolutely certain. You always got to accept that there's some risk, but making a well-thought-out plan can definitely increase your chances of success. And just as important, learn from your past decisions, both the good ones and the mistakes. Figuring out what worked and what didn't can help you avoid repeating those mistakes down the road.
It's a constant learning process, right? Adapting based on your experience.
So far, we've covered a lot: the emotional side of money, why it's important to align your finances with your values, and how to make good decisions in this crazy financial world. Now, how does it all fit together? How do we actually get to that funded contentment Portnoy talks about? Well, that's what he tackles in the last chapter, The Shape of Wealth. He pulls everything together and gives us a framework for building a life that's fulfilling both financially and personally.
So we've talked about aligning our money with what we care about, spending with purpose, and making smart decisions. How does Portnoy wrap it all up in this last chapter?
He uses this cool visual. He calls it the square of simplicity. Basically, each side of the square is like a key ingredient for building lasting financial and personal contentment.
I like visuals. Let's break it down. What's the first side of the square?
The first side is knowing what matters, which we've already touched on quite a bit. It's all about figuring out those core values that'll guide your money decisions. Think of it like the foundation you build everything else on.
It's about knowing the why behind your financial goals.
Yeah.
What's the next side?
The second side is making smart decisions. This is where you actually put those values into practice. It's about having strategies that work, but are also simple enough to stick with over time.
We don't want things to be overly complicated, that's for sure. What about the third side?
That one's all about navigating uncertainty, which we know is just part of life. It's about accepting that we can't control everything and being ready to adapt when things change, kind of like learning to dance in the rain instead of waiting for the storm to pass.
Being adaptable is so key. What's that final side of the square?
The last side is staying the course, which is all about discipline and staying focused. It's about committing to your goals and consistently taking action, even when things get tough or you're tempted to go off track.
It's about keeping that long-term vision in mind and not getting derailed by short-term impulses or setbacks. So am I getting this right? If you align these four sides of the square, knowing what matters, making smart choices, navigating uncertainty, and staying the course, that's how you get to that funded contentment.
Exactly. You could have the fanciest, most complex financial plan in the world, but if it doesn't match your values, your goals, the things that truly matter to you, it's not going to make you happy in the long run.
It's about finding that sweet spot where your finances are supporting the kind of life you want to live, one that feels meaningful and fulfilling. Portnoy talks a lot about discipline throughout the book, and he tips on how we can actually build that discipline, especially when it comes to money.
He has some great advice. First off, don't get too cocky. It's easy to get caught up in the hype, especially with investing. But it's important to, recognize what you don't know and ask for help when you need it. You don't have to be a financial expert. Nobody expects you to know it all.
So true. It's okay to admit what you don't know and reach out to people who do. What else does Portnoy say?
He also talks about recognizing and dealing with loss aversion. That's that thing where, losing money feels way worse than gaining the same amount feels good. It can make us way too cautious or even lead to panic selling when the market dips. The key is to stay focused on those long-term goals, ride out the ups and downs, and remember that time is on your side.
Don't give up, right? Keeping that long-term perspective could really help you avoid making emotional decisions. What other nuggets of wisdom does he share about staying disciplined?
One more good one is minimizing decision fatigue. We make so many decisions every day, and all that thinking can wear us down, which makes us more likely to make impulsive choices. Portnoy's advice is to simplify your systems and create routines to cut down on that decision fatigue. It's like decluttering your mind, the same way you might declutter your house.
I love that. It's about making things automatic where you can, setting clear rules for yourself and taking those small steps that add up over time. Before we wrap up, I want to touch on something Portnoy emphasizes throughout the book, the emotional side of wealth. What are your final thoughts on that and how it connects to this idea of funded contentment?
He really encourages us to focus on a few things: gratitude, being mindful, and keeping things in perspective. Gratitude helps us appreciate what we already have, shifting our focus away from what we don't have. Mindfulness is about being present and intentional with our money choices, like really thinking about why we're spending. And perspective helps us remember that our money is just one part of our lives, not the whole picture.
Money's a tool to help us build the life we want, but it's not the end goal in itself. True wealth is so much bigger than that. It includes our relationships, our health, our passions, our experiences, how we contribute to the world, and what we stand for.
It's about finding that balance, that harmony between our financial well-being and our overall happiness. Money should work for us, not the other way around.
Couldn't said it better myself. This deep dive into the geometry of wealth has been eye-opening. It's really made me think differently about what it means to be wealthy and how it's about way more than just the numbers in our bank accounts.
I agree. It challenges us to look at our relationship with money in a new way and how it can help us create a life that's both successful and meaningful.
So, listener, as we wrap up, we encourage you to think about what really resonated with you from this deep dive. Maybe it's the idea of aligning your spending with what's important to you, accepting uncertainty, or practicing gratitude and mindfulness.
Remember, true wealth isn't about chasing some magic number. It's about making your money work for what you believe in, creating a life that feels rich and fulfilling in every sense of the word.
Until next time, happy diving.